Well, what's lame this week is what's been lame for hundreds of years, and that is the Catholic Church. The popes are the whole thing with popes is just kind of a weird thing, right? We appoint one for life, and then one kicks the can, and then we wait for smoke to come out of a chimney. But that's all been upended recently when it turned out that Pope Benedict ended up being kind of old and incoherent and kind of rambled on in other languages that nobody understood for purposes unknown to many. But what we know now in a article that from the Church Times in the UK, during the time when he was Archbishop from 1977 to 1982, he was actually in meetings where different priests who were accused of pedophilia, of abusing kids in their parishes, the church would move them around instead of actually disciplining him. And now it's come to light that that he was definitively in the room and part of these talks, but he can very conveniently now today doesn't remember. Aww.
Of course, I don't remember a lot from 1977 either. Of course, I was one.
Nice. How dare you?
Boomer burn. I felt like my IQ just dropped by like 30 points. That was terrible.
My brain works in terms of like what broke. And so to me, the big thing, like the big idea here is that churches are designed, one of the ways the Bible puts it, is to be the city on the hill, the light of the world, right?
Yes.
We are supposed to be illuminating both the beautiful and the decrepit. And by knowing is half the battle, G.I. Joe, knowing is half the battle, that's how, like last week we talked about, that's how you begin the process of redeeming things. And so churches are not supposed to be places that spend enormous time and energy sweeping things under the rug.
Right. There's I don't know, it was a prayer or a benediction somewhere. I want to say it was something in the book, Common Prayer, but there's Shane Claiborne, not one of the other church versions of that, right? Like, come to the light as he is in the light. And I understand, that sucks. Sitting here, I've got these lamps, right, that are shining, I don't know how many lux on me right now, right? And these are, if there's any dirt on my hand, I can see it. There was a speck of coffee on the laptop here, and it was like, oh my, I did not see that before. The light shows us things that they're embarrassing.
Right.
We don't want to see it.
Yep. Absolutely.
But if you are going to expect anybody to bring things to light, and then not, and I don't want to say that they're being all shady, but when you're trying to do these things quietly, who are you benefiting?
Exactly right. When I was a quote unquote a young Christian, I was blessed to have this pastor who had this kind of a very simple way of teaching, right? He was not Mr. Complex Theology. He was Mr. like simple ideas for simple people. And one of the things he would always say is, what we do as a church? We learn to know Jesus better, and then we learn how to make Jesus known to others. This is another situation where church leaders, and by the way, so let me just say this parenthetically, we're talking about the Catholic Church here, quite possibly the single largest denomination, right? When you talk about the denomination, that really speaks for the whole of Christianity. Like when the Pope speaks, politicians listen, world leaders listen, business leaders listen, So when the Pope speaks, that carries real weight. Just like the Fed today. The Fed spoke and markets crashed. The Pope has the same power when he speaks. What happened today is another instance of the church, instead of being about the business of knowing Jesus and making Jesus known, getting hypnotized and mesmerized by damage control, or what we now call crisis management. When we get into crisis management mode, we get so concerned about reputation and about the profit and loss statement and about how this affects everybody's ability to keep the status quo, right?
Yeah.
That we forget real people were hurt, real kids, and that damage is going to last a lifetime. We forget that because this is such a large body of believers, the reputation isn't just damaged for the Catholic Church, it's damaged for all Christians everywhere.
in reading this article, so, it talks about how this guy that, he was in this meeting for, right?
Yeah.
This guy was brought into his parish, specifically for treatment, right? And what's been the big story for the last, decade or whatever now, right? It's been that, there has been this lack of support and treatment for the victims.
Right.
And of course that, it's gone to being covered up. And it's, if I'm trying to be not cynical about this, and that's a big ask when it comes to this kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
I really want to be a complete and utter a-hole about this.
Yeah.
But it's, if you are trying to treat the priests who have had problems, and there needs to be discipline. And I'm not saying, that everybody needs to get thrown in jail, but, if this is the kind of thing that is a result of mental illness, which it's my understanding that it is, a sexual attraction to children is not, a healthy brain make, that, yeah, the person needs treatment. But the person also shouldn't be in a position of a priest anymore, probably.
Right.
And it's not to say that we're treating the person like, like a jerk or a criminal or, like a demon. Mm-hmm. It's just that there needs to be, it's like, hey, look, you have this problem. You should not be in a position in ministry wherein you can exercise power over those people. And the fact that Benedict couldn't remember this case, it just makes me really concerned that the problem is even more pervasive than, the media stories have made it out to be.
Right.
Like, this should have been like a once in a lifetime, maybe twice in a lifetime event, right? For an archbishop to to do this, to deal with this kind of a problem.
Yeah.
But he couldn't remember that he was at this meeting, which makes me think like he'd been to enough of them where he couldn't remember which ones he was and wasn't at.
Right.
Or maybe I'm just reading too far into it. I don't know.
No, I don't think you are. And quite frankly, I have a hard time giving him the benefit of the doubt in believing that he doesn't remember. There's so much energy wasted on damage control. And part of the reason, and it's a very human thing to do, because we'd rather deflect on this thing that doesn't hurt as much as fixing the actual darn problem. We have a problem. Yeah. We have a problem that is the worst kept secret in decades in the Catholic Church, and that is children are abused by priests. Why? Why is that? Well, that might be because, I don't know, I'm just spitballing here, but maybe a vow of chastity has something to do about that. It's not really realistic for most human beings to do. And even if you say, well, priests, they're called and they're set apart and they're unique. Maybe they're all those things, and yet they're still human. And they still have a physical body that has gone through thousands of years of evolution and has requirements that must be fulfilled.
Right. And the scripture is pretty plain on the idea that, that chastity or celibacy, I think celibacy is the correct term.
Right. Right. You're right.
Yep. I forget which one.
You're right.
That's a spiritual gifting.
Yeah.
It is not for everybody.
Right.
Paul himself admits that, like, it's like, I wish that all of you could be like me, but because you'll start to burn with passion, you should probably take a spouse, do things correctly. Right.
Right.
That's a calling that you have, but it's not something that the scripture ever says. Paul's recommendations for everybody, right?
Yeah.
He never says like you should be celibate, but this is something that the Catholic Church for over millennia now, if memory serves, has been imposing on its clergy.
Right.
And maybe there's a virtue to that. When human beings have a sex drive, if you have a functioning libido, that's an issue. Mm-hmm. If you are, as a person, are asexual, which are not that common, but still those individuals exist, that's fine. But to force priests to do it is just kind of madness to me. There's a lot of good that comes from having a spouse and and from what I hear, raising children. If you can't, it's like we've talked about before, with Exodus International, right? People try to pray the gay away. Well, you can't pray the straight away either.
Right. Yep.
There's a kind of twisted logic to it. Like, well, you may not even be attracted to children to begin with. It may just be that they're easy to coerce and keep quiet. But it's just all sorts of craziness to me that the church the Catholic Church is going to try to impose this on its clergy, the damage that this has caused, I mean, not just individuals and not just to the reputation of the church. I mean, this is God's reputation, right?
Right.
Forget what people think about the church. Blaspheme the church all you want. We deserve it most of the time. But when you have an issue like this, it's like you get a cut on your leg and you just put like a bandage over it. And you peek under the bandage and you're like, oh, hey, that's turned really red. And, and you just put the bandage back. Well, and eventually, it starts to smell like cheese. That's a problem, And so like a little cut can kill you if you don't address it.
Right.
And something like this is not, I do not think, a little cut in anybody's mind. But all they've done is try to put a bandage on it without actually addressing the underlying need for healing.
Right.
And it's exploding today. So stuff that's been going on for, honestly, probably centuries.
So let's talk about dealing with it then. Because one of the things we want to do on this podcast is not just shake our fists at all the things going wrong, but maybe offer an alternative path to dealing with things. So I think in this case, I think the Catholic Church has been under fire for so long about the abuse of children by priests that they see this as the card that brings down the whole house of cards. They spend an inordinate amount of time and energy trying to stop. Like in the Matrix, Neo he sees everything in slow motion. He's that fast. Like they're seeing the house of cards fall in slow motion, and they think they can put their hands out and keep the house of cards from falling. And they don't see the fact that the cards are going to fall. They're going to fall. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because once the cards fall, you can actually go about the business of rebuilding.
Yeah, and I would like to think that it shouldn't have to come to that, right? Yeah. It shouldn't, require the collapse of any denomination to fix a problem like this. But unfortunately, something needs radical to happen. I mean, we've even heard, some things, seen some articles criticizing Pope Francis for not being as progressive on this matter as somebody should be.
Right.
Maybe a lot of it might have to do with the attitude of superiority within the church over like human laws, right? So it's like you have like the laws of the secular world, but the laws of the church are higher, and right, so they want to follow this law of grace. Yeah. But again, as I called out Mr. Moneybags,
Dave Ramsey,
in the last episode. There's that crony grace in his organization,
right.
And that's kind of what it feels like here. Is that it's been grace for the priests, but not grace for the victims.
Right.
And a big part of that is going to be to show the victims that you take the matter seriously, that when a priest violates the law, that they are subject to the law. After all, we do have it in the Bible. The government or the king bears the sword for a reason.
Right.
Whether you like it or not, it's there. And it is there to punish wrongdoers, at least in theory. That needs to be something that's dealt with, because not everybody in the church is clergy. And so you need to show them that you trust, that you love them and that they can trust you by actually making people subject for the penalties of their action.
Like, once the law is involved, you are now in a position of reactiveness. And I think the Catholic Church needs to get into the position of proactiveness. Do we really have a good vetting process? Like, we have great education for our priests in seminary. We've got great theology. It doesn't seem that they're really having a good antenna for vetting who struggles with this need for, love, acceptance, physical intimacy. And so the proactive approach would be better and more discerning in the apprenticeship phase of these priests' development, and just being realistic that there aren't as many priests ready for the burden of priesthood as they think and hope there are.
And that may very well be the matter to be dealt with on the front end. Of course, on the back end, it would be, treatment and whatnot. But in the middle, though, perhaps, we also need to see the Vatican become a lot more proactive in ensuring that priests have the support networks ongoing. Things change for people. You could show none of these signs at the beginning of your ministry, but then over time, various stresses and the repressed sexuality that you have to deal with, maybe a sense of isolation. You're a priest, right?
Yeah.
Your job automatically kind of puts you in a place where, the people you deal with most of the time are kind of detached from you in that way. Like there's that power dynamic, whether you wanted to be there or not, that could be too much for people as well. So I think that there's just a lot of psychological need that needs to be addressed throughout the ministry, rather than just saying, hey, you're called to be a priest, so you're also called to be this, and this. Like, no. We're actually going to work with you for the rest of your life to make sure you're empowered and healthy and ready to go and do your ministry well.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever read the book, one of the best-selling books of all time, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yeah, I use all the opposite techniques, I think. But
don't we all, right? One of the concepts they teach in there is you begin with the end in mind, right? When you're a priest, when you're a bishop, when you're an archbishop, you need to be making good decisions, because you just may end up being the Pope and forgetting that you were part of it, forgetting, in quotes, forgetting that you're a part of a really important meeting at a really pivotal time in church history,